Hey guys, it's Ryan here, and welcome back to Film Zone, a place to talk movies, TV, and everything in between. So finishing off this week full of awesome videos, today I will be reviewing, as well as ranking, all 23 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies so far, including the most recent installment, Spider-Man Far From Home, while also doing it under 15 minutes total. Please remember that this is just my opinion that I am sharing with you guys, and that I enjoy discussing these things with you guys and having a nice, lively conversation with all of you, but that it is important to be respectful when doing so. Now, before we get into this video, if you're new here, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, as well as turning on the notification bell so you can see all of my latest content as soon as it comes out. With that in mind, let's get started. Number 23. Coming in 23rd place, in what is, in my opinion, is the worst movie in the MCU, is Thor: The Dark World. This movie almost doomed the Thor franchise and almost killed Thor as a character, honestly. This was a dull and tasteless addition to the MCU that didn't do much good. While there were some decent pacing and good acting, the tone, plotline, and especially the villain Malekith were not very good at all, causing this movie to be a jumbled mess that had some good things, but not much, and rightfully deserves a 5.7 out of 10. Number 22. Next up is The Incredible Hulk. This movie was fine, nothing great, nothing bad, and some could even argue it's not even an MCU movie because of how distant it feels from the rest of the franchise. Mark Ruffalo is definitely better as the Hulk than Edward Norton, but Edward Norton was still good. Abomination was an okay villain that I wish we saw more of, but overall this was a pretty bland movie that came before the MCU really found its footing, and I would give it a 6.2 out of 10. In the 21st spot is Iron Man 2. Coming off the success of Iron Man, this movie was a pretty big disappointment. This movie right here is a prime example of having too many stupid plot lines that don't really go anywhere. Robert Downey Jr. was still good as ever, and this movie did introduce many solid characters to the MCU, but Whiplash wasn't great, the plot lines weren't great, and the movie just kind of fell flat for me. Overall, I would give this movie a 6.5 out of 10. Number 20. Well, the last three on this list I didn't really like at all. These next few films, while I did find them enjoyable, aren't the best in the MCU, but are still good. So at number 20 is the original Thor. This movie introduced to us the God of Thunder and gave us some exposition on his character. The fish out of water story in this movie was pretty fun at times, and others not so much. And this movie did introduce one of the best villains in the MCU, Loki, but overall, this movie still had plenty of issues, and I would give it a 7 out of 10. Next up for me in number 19 is Avengers: Age of Ultron. The disappointing Avengers film. This movie offered a pretty promising villain in Ultron, who seemed menacing enough to promise a good time at the movies, but eventually the movie just turned into a bland rehash of the first film, with him sending an army of Ultrons just like Loki did, except not with Ultrons, obviously. And while it did have some classic Avengers moments, it did have plenty of faults, like killing Quicksilver off, and I would give it a 7.4 out of 10. Number 18. Next up in the number 18 spot is Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel was entertaining, don't get me wrong, but it also had some issues that were pretty much worked out in phase 1, such as the storyline wasn't the best, the movie had a slower pace, and the acting wasn't phenomenal or anything. Brie Larson was okay as Captain Marvel, and while I did like the relationship between her and Nick Fury, there wasn't really any emotion coming from her, and because of that, I would give this movie a 7.6 out of 10. In 17th place is Doctor Strange. I know some people really like this movie, but I found it to just be okay. The villain wasn't awesome or anything, but there were some cool action scenes, and I thought Strange's intro was pretty good. Benedict Cumberbatch was, of course, great, and I really like the CGI in this movie, but the overall tone and plot weren't very compelling, and I would give this movie a 7.9 out of 10. Up next, in the 16th spot, is Iron Man 3. While it still had too many plot lines like the second movie, I thought this movie was much better than the second one. It featured a better villain, a more compelling story, and was a pretty good way to end the trilogy. While it wasn't as good as the first one, it fixed most of the problems in the second and also set up Avengers 2 pretty well, so I would give it a solid 8 out of 10. Then in 15th place is the first Ant-Man. This movie I found pretty enjoyable with amazing casting. Paul Rudd is amazing, and it offered a pretty decent origin story for the hero. The villain Yellow Jacket was pretty good, and the train scene when they were really tiny was hilarious and yet satisfying at the same time. Overall, while it is not the best MCU movie, it has plenty of laughs, plenty of heart, and it is still a fun time at the theater, so I would give it an 8.1 out of 10. And the 14th spot for me is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, but I thought the first one was hilarious, and so was this one, but comparing this one to the first one, the second installment does have some major flaws. Ego as a villain was pretty decent, and Mantis was a pretty good addition to the team, but the movie had some pacing problems and some dull moments that leave it a little further down on the list for me, and I would give it an 8.3 out of 10. Number 13. Up next in the 13th spot is the first Captain America, the First Avenger. This movie, set in the 1940s, has one of the strongest first hours in the MCU as it introduces and establishes Captain America as this hero really well. And Red Skull was a pretty decent villain, but the quality did drop off in the second half of the movie, leaving me a bit unsatisfied, so I would give the movie a solid 8.4 out of 10. Next up at number 12 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. I found this sequel to Ant-Man to be much better than the first, offering another cool heist film. Ghost wasn't the best villain, and neither was Sonny Birch, but both together worked pretty well and brought a good time. Ant-Man was great, and both of the leads here were wonderful as well, making this an enjoyable movie that deserves an 8.5 out of 10. Number 11. Now the next 11 spots can be my favorite MCU movie one day, and then the next day, a different movie can be my favorite, since they're all so good. But in 11th place for me is Spider-Man Homecoming. Tom Holland was great in this movie, and so was the Vulture. It had a pretty good balance of high school life and Spider-Man life, but the third act wasn't crazy awesome or anything, and I would still give this movie an 8.8 out of 10, since it is definitely rewatchable. Number 10. Next up at number 10 is Iron Man. I think it's crazy that this movie that started at all 11 years ago would be this low on the list. That's just a testament to Marvel, honestly. This movie introduced Robert Downey Jr. as an amazing adaptation of Iron Man. Ironmonger was great in this movie, and the origin of Tony Stark was handled really nicely. This movie laid the foundation for the MCU, and even though it still had some Phase 1 problems, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would give it a 9 out of 10. In 9th place is Black Panther. I really liked this movie, and while I wouldn't say it's the best MCU movie, it's definitely up there. Chadwick Boseman, however you pronounce that, as Black Panther was so good, and the costume was awesome. The action was great, and even though there wasn't tons of emotion in this movie still packed a punch for me. I believe this cultural masterpiece deserves a 9.1 out of 10, and is tied, in my opinion, in quality with this next movie. Next up at number 8 is Thor Ragnarok, the movie that saved the Thor franchise. I found this movie to be about the same quality as Black Panther and was awesome, just like Black Panther, with the great villain and Hela and with some awesome action scenes. Again, even though it had a little more humor than Black Panther, I did find it super enjoyable, but also sometimes not great, so it pretty much evens out, and I would give it the same score at 9.1 out of 10. In the 7th spot is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I love this movie, absolutely love it. It's one of the most rewatchable movies in the MCU, in my opinion. With great action, a solid first half, and an even better second half that kept me entertained throughout. The Winter Soldier was a great villain since he had a personal connection to Steve, and I think Bucky was a great character, and I really liked the plot points he had going further into the MCU and setting up the third Captain America movie, so I would give this movie a 9.2 out of 10. Up next at number 6 is the latest installment to the MCU, Spider-Man: Far From Home. I already gave my full-length review on this movie, and you could see it on my channel. I just posted it yesterday, and I honestly found this movie to be an absolute blast. The cast was great, the action was great, the plotline and the villain were all wonderful, and it kept me thoroughly entertained. The only thing honestly keeping this movie from the top 3 for me is the humor, since it kind of took me away from the serious moments, but still added a lot to the movie. But overall, I would give this movie a 9.2 out of 10. Entering the top 5, here we have the original Guardians of the Galaxy. I generally love this movie, and I love the dynamic between our team of heroes. I think this movie did a great job of introducing Thanos as well towards the end and was a very vital movie in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. This movie had some hilarious moments with Rocket and even added some heartfelt ones by just saying, "We are Groot." But overall, I think bring this movie together at a great 9.4 out of 10. Next up at number 4 is the original Avengers. This movie was awesome. The MCU built these characters that you love up in just 4 years to create a fun, action-packed movie that makes you just honestly want to sit back and go, wow, what a great accomplishment. The cast was great with Chris Hemsworth, Chris Evans, Tom Hiddleston, Robert Downey Jr., and many more. And the action was great, the villain was great, and overall, even after 15 films, this movie still holds up as a wonderful testament to the MCU, and I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. In third place is Captain America: Civil War, or should I call it Avengers 2.5. This movie had an awesome setup in the Winter Soldier and had a storyline of Bucky, or the Winter Soldier, killing Tony Stark's parents. And I love this movie because it's not just a good and bad side or a dark and a light side, but rather two opposing sides that you both understand and root for at the same time, creating an awesome climactic movie that I think deserves a 9.7 out of 10. Earning the silver medal for me is Avengers: Endgame. I absolutely loved this movie. The satisfying conclusion to 22 films and 11 years of the MCU had heart, emotion, action, comedy, and plenty of awesome moments. All of the characters are great in this movie, and even Fat Thor seemed pretty cool to add in there for some comedic relief. While I do think Thanos was better in Infinity War, this movie is still awesome and deserves an amazing 10 out of 10. And in first, for me, is Avengers: Infinity War. This movie had heart, awesomeness, cool comedy, and handled the huge main cast wonderfully. I thought the action in this movie was a little bit better and more significant than in Endgame, and Thanos was better in this movie, but he was still awesome in the second movie. I really don't need to explain this movie any further since the grand scale of it and the grand sheer awesomeness of it is enough to push it all the way to the top. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. This concludes an awesome week full of videos. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you on Monday with a normal schedule where I will be doing all Pixar movies ranked. See ya!